On October 6, 2025, around 1:41 p.m., city of Dzerzhinsk in Russia's Nizhny Novgorod Oblast was living through a routine workday. The streets were loud with factory shifts, the hum of trucks moving through the industrial zone, and the steady rhythm of a war economy running on full speed. Then, without warning, that rhythm broke. In the next moment, smoke began to rise from the Sverdlov plant, one of Russia's largest and most important arms factories. For decades, this massive facility had been the beating heart of Moscow's weapons production, producing artillery shells, guided air bombs, missile warheads, and explosives that fueled every front of the war in Ukraine. Inside its vast workshops, engineers and technicians assembled munitions that would later tear across battlefields hundreds of kilometers away. But that afternoon, the factory itself became the battlefield. Multiple Ukrainian drones struck deep inside Russian territory, hitting the plant's explosives and ammunition sections and triggering a chain of secondary blasts. Within moments, massive fireballs ripped through storage depots, setting off a series of detonations that roared through Dzerzhinsk's skyline. Footage from nearby roads showed flames flying high and black smoke towering across the industrial zone. This time, Ukrainian forces weren't targeting soldiers or open fields. They were hitting the nerve centers of Russia's war production, the very sites that built the weapons used against them. And this strike didn't stop there. Reports confirmed that an oil terminal in occupied Crimea and an ammunition depot belonging to Russia's 18th Combined Arms Army were also hit that same day. So how did Ukraine manage to pull off simultaneous, high-impact strikes this deep inside Russian and occupied territory? And what does this mean for the future of long-range warfare? Let me take you through what really happened that afternoon. At 8 a.m., the operations hub woke. Analysts pulled together satellite photos, social posts, human tips, and SIGINT snippets. Sverdlov had been on the list for weeks. It was not just another factory, it made explosives, warheads, and almost every type of ammunition in Russia's inventory. Knocking it out would not only destroy stockpiles, but also slow production lines and force Moscow to reroute supplies. That strategic logic gave planners the mandate to try a deep strike. By 9:10 a.m., imagery teams had mapped the plant in detail. They drew the production halls, storage depots, rail spurs, and fuel lines. They identified choke points where a single blast could lead to a chain of multiple failures. Legal officers ran collateral models, and engineers ran failure mode forecasts. That work shaped weapon choices and flight paths. The aim was simple: hit the nodes that mattered most while keeping civilians and unrelated infrastructure safe. At 10:07 a.m., the strike cell executed the plan as if it were a live dress rehearsal. They used sensor fusion, which involved combining different types of pictures: recent satellite photos to see the layout, daylight and infrared cameras to spot heat, radio intercepts to show activity, and local reports from people on the ground. Teams practiced the exact sequence they would follow: spot the target, double-check it, cue the drones, strike, and then quickly check the results. They also ran a quick drill to find radio transmitters if needed by having several listening stations point to the signal and draw a small search box. Pilots updated the drone seekers so they would lock on building shapes, rail cars, and tank clusters instead of only heat. Backups were ready too: alternate routes, abort points, and fast re-attack plans. It looked less like improvisation and more like a well-rehearsed operation. By 11:30 a.m., a narrow window opened. A commercial satellite passed over with fresh imagery showing rail cars at the southern yard. Border Guard reconnaissance confirmed fuel trucks were moving at a terminal in Feodosia. The command authorized a multi-axis package. One axis would hit Sverdlov's production and storage nodes. A second axis would strike the marine oil terminal in Feodosia to disrupt fuel movement. A third would target an ammunition depot used by Russia's 18th Combined Arms Army in occupied Crimea. Coordinating three axes added risk, but multiplied the strategic pressure. At 12:10 p.m., teams prepped the drones. Planners chose two basic types. Winged long-range strike drones carried precision warheads designed to rupture storage tanks and penetrate critical machinery. Fast FPV multi-rotors carry minor collision or explosive charges, making them ideal for smashing generators, cutting power, or physically destroying antenna arrays. The combination gave both strategic punch and surgical detail, Interceptors used shaped charge-style munitions to sever feed lines and focused blast warheads to collapse piping without scattering dangerous fragments far and wide. At 12:45 p.m., the launch order was sent from several hidden pads, making the drones harder to spot on the ground. The autopilots loaded pre-planned routes that aimed to avoid the primary radar coverage of big S-300 and S-400 batteries. The flight plans relied on terrain masking, by flying low behind hills, trees, or buildings, and on timing the run to slip through gaps between radar sweeps. The drones used redundant navigation to prevent loss if GPS failed. Inertial sensors kept them on course by measuring motion, barometric altimeters maintained a safe height, and optical flow camera-based motion sensing assisted in lining up for the final approach. Operators monitored secure telemetry feeds, showing speed, altitude, and signal strength, remaining ready to take manual control if a seeker or sensor required human assistance. Cross-border transit felt long but compressed. By 2:10 p.m., the first winged drones slipped into Russian airspace over the steppe. They stayed low to reduce their radar signatures. FPVs staged from nearer launch points and took steeper terminal angles. Control links used frequency hopping and encryption to blunt basic jamming. The strike cell monitored Russian air defense chatter for any hint of engagement. Some radar nodes lit up, but nothing forced a mission abort. The planners had accepted risk. Deep strikes always carried it. The approach concentrated on Sverdlov's southern storage yards. At 3:05, the onboard seekers woke. Visual templates matched tank farms, rail cars, and roof lines. Infrared pics flagged hot loading points. One winged drone flew down for a terminal run with a delayed fuse warhead so the blast would rupture internal piping and feed lines rather than scatter shrapnel across residential areas. FPV teams split off to hit control huts, diesel generators, and electrical nodes to slow firefighting and emergency response. Every action has a balanced effect against risk. At 3:12 p.m., the first impacts occurred. A focused warhead struck a primary storage bunker. Propellants ignited. Secondary detonations followed as nearby munitions cooked off. The sound was later described as thunder rolling across Dzerzhinsk. Winged drones made follow-up passes to hit transfer pumps and rail loading points to prevent the quick evacuation of remaining stocks. FPVs knocked out power feeds and smashed control panels, hamstringing the site's ability to fight the fires efficiently. Then came the moment nobody could predict. Russian air defenses were awake. The radar scopes in Dzerzhinsk started lighting up with small, fast echoes. Operators shouted bearings. Within seconds, Pantsir point defense turrets began to rotate and lock on. Tracer fire stitched across the horizon, and a few seconds later, the stronger echo of S-300 missiles followed, slicing through the air. For nearly 10 minutes, it turned into a deadly chase. The sky above the industrial belt flickered with streaks of light as interceptors tried to swat down what they could barely see. One FPV drone almost made it until a Pantsir battery locked on and fired. The explosion hit just a few hundred meters from the main factory building, shattering windows and flipping the small drone end over end. In Kiev's control room, silence fell. Every operator's eyes were glued to the feed, waiting to see if the others would survive the chase. The mission wasn't over, but for a moment, it felt like it could all collapse right there, with everything hanging in the air between success and disaster. But the planners had prepared for this long before the first drone took off. Routes were drawn to thread known blind spots in radar coverage and to exploit the seconds it took defenders to react. The winged drones did not arrive together. They came in from different directions and at slightly different times, preventing Russian crews from turning every weapon at once. The small FPVs were meant to be risky, and when they flew into the envelope, they forced defenders to split their attention and fire. Most importantly, the timing was of the essence. The heavy hits were scheduled to land in the brief window before point defenses could lock and shoot effectively. In the end, several Russian interceptors only reached the scene after the critical explosions had already occurred. Meanwhile, the Feodosia Axis reached the marine oil terminal. There, the goal was different, but equally painful. Targeting focused on transshipment gear, pump stations, valves, and a key loading rack. A precisely placed strike ruptured a transfer pump and set the stored fuel on fire. The resulting blaze and damage halted transshipment capability and delayed the delivery of fuel that would have gone to frontline units. Knocking out fuel flow is a classic multiplier in warfare because it slows movement, logistics, and maintenance. Back at Sverdlov, a follow-up surprise increased the damage. The strike planners had timed a second wave of FPVS to hit the plant's emergency power and firefighting pumps during the initial conflagration. With emergency systems degraded, the site's ability to contain secondary fires collapsed. What might have been a contained attack became a long, feeding inferno. That was the brutal math behind this attack. Initial hits to kill production and storage. Follow-up hits to deny response. Russia's near interception was not insignificant. Local air defense reports claimed dozens of drones were intercepted and many were shot down. Moscow pushed this in state media to show their act of self-defense. On the ground, some intercepts did succeed, yet the most critical blows had already landed. In modern strike, timing is everything. A defensive success that comes after the crucial moment is often tactically hollow. As smoke climbed into the afternoon sky, emergency crews fought to contain the damage. Foam teams and high-capacity pumps from Dzerzhinsk and neighboring towns ran hose lines toward the hottest spots. Getting close was dangerous. Some munitions did not explode right away. They could cook off hours later, turning a controlled response into a deadly gamble. Satellite images that evening showed blackened roofs, blown-out walls, and gaps where tanks once stood. Intelligence teams started their forensic work immediately, saving videos, geolocating social posts, and collecting telemetry to confirm precisely what had burned. The early forensics told a dark story. Assembly lines were scarred, precision tools were damaged or contaminated, and production halls were covered in debris. Rail spurs and pump stations that moved parts and fuel were ruined or blocked. In short, the plant could not keep producing at the same rate. That forced Moscow to pull on reserve stocks, reroute shipments, and rush repairs. Creating that short-term squeeze on ammunition and supplies was exactly what Kiev planned to do. The strikes in Crimea added to the pressure. The hit on the Feodosia terminal knocked out critical transshipment gear and started a large fire. An ammunition depot tied to the 18th Combined Arms Army was also damaged. Together, these blows delayed resupply to frontline units and forced Russian logisticians to move stocks over longer, riskier routes. Destroying fuel and ammo nodes is not dramatic in headlines, but it hurts the enemy where it matters most. Tactically, the operation confirmed what planners already suspected. Integrated intelligence won the day. Satellite overpasses created the window. HUNTED and SIGINT filled in the details. And direction finding closed the gaps. The mixed drone approach worked too. Winged drones delivered the heavy hits, while FPV craft created local chaos and slowed defensive responses. Redundancy helped both sides. Where Russia had dispersed and hardened facilities, damage was limited. Where stocks were concentrated, the effects were severe. When the dust settled, neither side stayed silent. Kiev called the strikes a success, one aimed at crippling Russia's ability to keep bombing Ukrainian cities. The Sverdlov plant in Dzerzhinsk, Ukraine's military said, had been one of Russia's main sources of explosives. Hours after the explosions, the General Staff confirmed multiple hits and said the attack was part of a plan to cut down Moscow's offensive potential.
Relatives of some of those who died in the war between Russia and Ukraine are buried by the Russian military. They do not know who they are.
But in Russia, officials tried to control the story. Regional Governor Gleb Nikitin announced that air defenses had shot down 20 drones and that no damage was caused to industrial facilities. Still, videos shared online told another story: broken windows, black smoke, and emergency sirens echoing through the city. Ukraine didn't stop there. Its forces also struck an oil depot and an ammunition site in Crimea, setting off massive fires visible for miles. These targets, officials said, were chosen to stretch Russian supply lines and force them to move resources farther from the front. Moscow's response came fast. Over the weekend, Russia launched one of its biggest waves of missiles and drones in weeks, more than 50 missiles and 500 drones across Ukrainian cities. In Lviv, an entire family of 4 was killed when debris hit their home. Power plants in Zaporizhia and Chernihiv were damaged, leaving thousands without electricity. President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the strikes, saying Russia had once again targeted everything that ensures normal life for our people. He urged allies for faster air defense deliveries, adding, "Only then can we deprive this aerial terror of any meaning." For now, Ukraine calls its attack a message. Russia calls it a provocation. The war, however, only seems to be speeding up. By 1:41 p.m., Dzerzhinsk was still choking on smoke. The YM Sverdlov plant, once a crown jewel of Russian firepower, lay in ruins. Flames still licked at twisted steel while Feodosia's oil depot burned miles away. Its black fumes were now a warning for Moscow. For Ukraine, this was proof that distance no longer guaranteed safety. For Russia, it was the beginning of an unsettling question. If Ukraine could hit this deep, this precisely, what would they strike next?